So caste and politics in India. We'll explore all these different facets of the topic, I'm sure. If you allow me a short preface, I would like to say two things, rather quickly, and there's no need for me to stand for saying this. Well, a personal point first, I'm really very happy that Colombia and the South Asia Institute have placed this conference on caste in India under the aegis of Ambedkar, who was indeed a scholar and one of us in many ways, a sociologist before others, before many others, even though he is not yet in the readers where he should be on sociology of India. But we must remember that this acknowledgement of his accomplishments came after decades of neglect. And I never miss an opportunity to recall that 10 years ago only, we had no biography of Ambedkar in English, except the one by Kerr that was written in 1954, and that was rather controversial. Whereas we had so many Gandhis, Nehrus, G.B. Pants, what else? This is something we have to remember all the time, because it means that there was a long overdue acknowledgement of his accomplishment that is now taking place. And this conference is, of course, part of this long overdue acknowledgement. And the next step probably should be that, well, Colombia should have an Ambedkar chair. That would be the greatest achievement. My only fear is that this, in that process of acknowledgement, we may lose one aspect of Ambedkar. Sorry. That was the core identity of the man. He was a rebel till the end. He fought till the end, and he died a bitter man. So he's not an establishment man. Even his suit is just telling us, I dare being like you. I'm not the establishment man. I can be. I could be. And he said it. But he was a fighter first. The second point quickly I want to make is that it's not at all inappropriate to begin such a conference with politics. We could have started with other things, but politics, it's a rather good entry point, precisely if we go by Ambedkar's views of society and the world, even. As he said, politics is the key. Power is the key on the route to emancipation. Empowerment. In empowerment, there is power, so there is politics. And the panelist I'm going to introduce now will precisely look at politics in many different ways, because there are many ways, of course, of looking at politics in this context. They may not even refer to party politics. They may not even pronounce the word election at any rate, but that will be politics anyway. And I'm sure the Q&A session will help us to bring back some of the more conventional way we have to look at politics. So let me introduce quickly the three speakers, the three co-panelists in the reverse order of their presentation. Shiva Kami first, ladies first, who has been in government service for a long time, from 1979 to last year, in the IAS, and as an IAS officer, she has been collector, she has been secretary to government of Tamil Nadu in Adi Dravidar and Tribal Welfare Department. It reminds me of what Pratap said about the 69% of the reservation in Tamil Nadu, where you have even a department for Adi Dravidar and Tribal Welfare, which is not something you'll find in the North so easily. And she is now a novelist. She has published 4 novels after leaving the government for some of them. 2 of them are available, accessible in English. The others are in Tamil, I suppose. And she is editing a Tamil journal. I'll give you the title in English because I'm not able to do it otherwise. The Dalit Literary Journal that is functioning since 1995. Dr. Anand Teltumbde is well known as an activist and a human rights man in Maharashtra, but also in the rest of India. He was born in a family of landless laborers in Vidarbha region of Maharashtra, that is the eastern part of Maharashtra. He has been top-ranking student throughout, earning his BE in mechanical engineering from VNIT in Nagpur, his MBA from the IIM of Ahmedabad, and he has done his doctorate in management, focusing on a pioneering area of cybernetic modeling for public systems. Dr. Teltumde is very well known for all the research he has done on caste, and especially the Dalits in India. I will mention only 2 books among many others. 2 books you may have read already because they have really made an impact. Kalanji, A Strange and Bitter Crop, that came out 2 years ago, sorry, last year only. And we'll go back to Kalanji, I'm sure, after and during this presentation. And the other book is slightly older, Anti-Imperialism and Annihilation of Caste. This very phrase, of course, comes from Ambedkar himself. Murli, Balmurli Natarajan, is assistant professor in anthropology. I like this pluridisciplinarity of the panel. And is very active. Maybe you're not an activist, but very active anyway.
I'm an activist.
So you're an activist, very good. I wanted to say the word, but it's not in your biodata, so I didn't dare to do it. So he's an activist and a scholar as well. A scholar who has co-edited and written 2 books I'd like to quote, among many others. Against Stigma, Studies in Caste, Race, and Justice since Durban. So we are back to the international context. And this book has been co-edited by him and Paul Greenock. It will be published, or it has been published this year, by Orient, you don't say Orient Longman anymore. Huh? You say Orient Black Swan, but it's the same place, Hyderabad. And the other book is forthcoming, Crafting Caste in India, Caste into Cultural Community, and Routledge will publish it in London, and I hope also in India, because it will be more, well, it will be cheaper. The last thing I want to mention is an article by him, an article that may set the tone of the panel. It came this July, it came out this July in EPW, Economic and Political Weekly, in Indian electoral democracy, the only game in town. So we are, of course, approaching politics in a different perspective when you do not look at elections only as the only game in town. And that's what Murli will do first, because he'll speak first for only 15 minutes, or for 15 minutes only, so that we'll have the time for the Q&A session to be really substantial. The title of his presentation is Caste and Multiculturalism, semicolon, Slippery Slope to the End of Annihilation. Murli, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I thank the organizers for having me over, and especially my friend Gajendran. It's an incredible honor for me to be here with all the wonderful panelists. Since Professor Jaffrello mentioned the EPW article, I just remembered that I'd called electoral politics in India the ultimate antidepressant. So maybe we'll have a chance to revisit that. I have my reasons for saying so. I'm going to try to piggyback on where we left off and then move onwards to make way for the afternoon panel too, in some sense. So some years ago, the African-American actor Danny Glover complained that taxi cabs in New York City did not stop for him when he hailed them. And in a trenchant critique of multiculturalism from the left, legal scholar Richard Ford reminded us that we should not think that Danny hailed cabs in a specially African-American sort of a way. Something like a black cultural act. That was not the reason why taxi cabs did not stop for him. Cabs obviously did not stop for Danny simply because he was black. And we need to remember that, according to Richard Ford. We can draw any number of lessons from this, including speculate on the fact that many taxi cab drivers in the city are of South Asian descent and how new immigrants quickly learn how to racialize. But I actually want to focus on only one lesson in order to make only one point in the 14 and a half minutes left about caste in the Indian case. And that is that racial discrimination is not about culture, but it is often thought to be so. This is a point stressed by Ford. And I want to keep that in mind. And of course, Danny Glover was not contributing to cultural diversity in any way when he was hailing a cab. So I want us to launch into something about caste. Consider the following three discourses already in place in the Indian context today. The first is what I shall call state speak from the corridors of power. In his 13th Lester Pearson Memorial Lecture at Delhi University in 2007, India's then Commerce Minister, Mr. Jairam Ramesh, who is now the Environmental Minister, spoke of how India managed its incredible diversity vis-a-vis other Euro-American nations by saying the following. I begin the quote. Indeed, India has the greatest diversity, 7 major religions and numerous other sects and faiths, 22 official languages, and over 200 recorded mother tongues, and around 4,635 largely endogamous communities, end quote. The number 4635, of course, refers to 645 scheduled tribes or ST groups, and the rest 3,990 caste groups, which anybody who has even a cursory understanding of India knows that that number keeps changing, depending on how we count. But at least that's an approximate thing. So that's the first discourse in place, state speak. The second is expert speak from the academy. Political scientist Ashutosh Varshney argues that four kinds of social diversities in India, namely language diversity, tribal diversities, religious diversities, and caste diversities, have each been sought to be politically accommodated within India's power structure, namely through the policies of federalism, that is for the linguistic and tribal diversities, personal laws, that is for the religious diversities, and affirmative action or reservation for caste diversities. Speaking about caste in the language of diversity is not something new, but it is definitely gaining a lot of ground, and a number of scholars seem to have adopted that, none of whom I believe have any doubt that caste is also very much about inequality. I just want to put it out there that the language of diversity is already in place. Other scholars, for example, have spoken of caste as ethnic groups. So this is also something very much in place. The third kind of discourse which is in place is what I would call an intellectual activist subaltern speak, for we all know that subalterns do speak. In January 2002, the Bhopal document was released as a Dalit Agenda for the 21st century. And this is perhaps, in my opinion, the first large-scale attempt to put forward a case to address casteism against Dalits using the language specifically of diversity. Writing about this initiative, political scientist Shyam Babu, who is also a major participant in drafting the document, notes that a key rationale of the document was to make a case to address exclusion and underrepresentation of Dalits in the broader economy by calling for workplace diversity in place of reservations, because the policy of reservations lacked non-Dalit approval and was viewed as too rigid with its stress on quotas. So this is a rationale. Let's go with diversity because there's a huge simmering, at least, and sometimes coming out backlash against reservations. In a special section titled Diversity, the Way Out, that document makes clear that it is borrowing from the US model of affirmative action and diversity practices within American corporations. In another section titled Conceptualizing the Dalit Agenda that introduces the document, the prime place of the diversity principle is acknowledged in the following way. And the quote is, "The issue of diversity and democratization of all walks of life has been the mainstay of the Bhopal Declaration. Democratization of capital and credit and ensuring a proportionate share for Dalits in the market economy should be taken seriously. Diversity in the workforce will be one of the major issues that will be haunting the nation in the years to come," end quote. Now, each of these discourses puts into place a particular connection between caste and diversity that I wish to explore in the remaining few minutes. The reason we need to be interested in this is because I am arguing that caste has become a mark of democracy in India today, so that when particular things happen to it, conclusions and claims are made about Indian democracy. In the short paragraph that we all received as panelists as to what this panel is all about, we were asked to also think about Shining India, the mantra that has not gone away, and it is definitely still believed not only by the ruling classes, by an ever-shrinking middle class too. And two of the pillars of Shining India are economic growth and, of course, democracy. And I've always wondered why the claims to democracy in India are not as well challenged or as strongly challenged as the claims for a kind of a neoliberal globalization that has benefited all. That claim has been challenged in an incredible number of ways and continues to be. But I've wondered why the claim to democracy has not been challenged as strongly as it could be or ought to be, even in the face of such massive witch hunts as Operation Green Hunt, which is currently underway in large swathes of India, and the daily assaults on the tenuous democratic fabric of everyday India, including judicial assaults. So at some point we have to face up to some of these issues. And I'm not saying we don't, but I wish we did more. In other words, I'm interested in how India appears democratic, or how the illusion of democracy is maintained. I believe it's a very useful task to engage with. So part of the reason for the continuing legitimacy to the claims of being democratic is the quantitative fact of much larger numbers than ever before of Dalits, OBCs, and women seemingly participating in the political process via the formation of political parties, legislative initiatives such as the Panchayat Raj institutions that mandate women at the lowest levels of political office, and the extension of reservations. This fact has not unreasonably been viewed as a positive sign of a vibrant democracy in India, and some have even hailed it as revolution. And I don't have a quarrel with that term, at least right now, but I want to shift a little bit and make another point related to that. And that is that there is a far more silent revolution that has taken place in India and is currently still taking place. And it's a revolution that I would think of as a counter-revolution, really, because it has made it even more difficult to challenge India's status as a democracy. And this is the fact that caste has incredibly and almost silently legitimized itself as cultural identity or as ethnicity. And now caste difference is conflated regularly with cultural difference. Casteism, in my opinion, has become cultural casteism, and we can talk a little bit about that when the time comes. But definitely all of this threatens to occlude any more scrutiny of caste in India's democracy for a long time to come. Increasingly, both within and outside India, caste groups present themselves as cultural groups, such that caste comes to be viewed, embodied, and performed by social actors simply as pre-existing cultural difference, rather than as socially constructed relations of inequality and socially ascribed forms of identity. In other words, caste in globalizing India has revitalized itself, made itself anew as cultural community or samaj, and this it has done by claiming to be less about blood and more about culture. Casteism too continues unabated as cultural casteism, or simply as a benign practice of what Pierre Bourdieu would have called taste or preference, rather than as caste-based monopolization, stigmatization, exclusion, and exploitation. For example, in Hindi, one can find caste being presented more as being about khan, peen, rehen, sehen, or lifestyle-based cultural traits, rather than as unch neech, high, low ranking, and things like that. And I have called this as the culturalization of caste, in distinction to the ethnicization of caste, which we can touch upon later if we have time to. Now, Ambedkar, if he were around today, he would be gasping at how his once radical phrase calling for the abolition of caste, which is actually, he used abolition of caste a lot more in that annihilation of caste piece than he used annihilation, but it meant the same. But it also gives us a clue as to Ambedkar's way of thinking. But he would think that his phrase now appears very quaint. to us. It was a phrase that placed law and legislation at the heart of social transformation, even while educating and agitating to organize social movements for change. Anthony Appiah, a scholar of race, notes in the US context of race versus ethnicity that unlike race, which Appiah admits could wither away in the US, could go away at some point, unlike race, ethnic identities seem likely to persist so long as people are raised in families, which means forever, perhaps. So if we bear that in mind, along similar lines, caste as a culturalized element, a culturalized principle, has become even more durable by laying claim to the terrain of culture and tweaking its grammar. Let's go back to caste and diversity now. The Bhopal document, very disappointingly, does not show cognizance of the sense in which the term diversity is used in debates over affirmative action in the US. And we had a wonderful, wonderful source of information in the previous panel, President Lee Bollinger, who definitely touched on that. But I want to bring it out maybe even more sharper. In a post-Baki and a post-Grutter scenario, it has become very clear that whenever the term diversity is used, it means cultural diversity and not racial or ethnic diversity. In Indian context, it does not mean caste diversity, which is the way which is a sense in which the Bhopal document talks about supplier diversity. When they are saying you need, as a government, to give out more contracts to Dalit business people, they are not asking that favor because Dalit business people do business in a particularly Dalit way. In fact, Dalit businesses do exactly the same kind of business in the normal way, but because of a casteist society, they would not otherwise get that contract. So we need to find that kind of a slippage occurring very easily. Caste diversity becomes cultural diversity. So, for example, again, as Richard Ford put it bluntly, the expectation derived from a diversity policy, and everybody agrees that post-Baki, the move has gone away from discrimination towards promotion of cultural diversity. And Richard Ford says, and I quote him, "If diversity is the reason you got into school, you better get off your chair and show us some diversity," end quote. That is, a person who's a diversity hire is expected to bring cultural diversity. And this marks a clear shift from viewing the hire as the effect of a policy to redress an exclusionary practice. And this is not the sense that the Bhopal document intends to use the term, but it flirts with it, and it does it very dangerously. Further, the Indian Constitution itself distinguishes very sagaciously between caste groups on the one hand and religious, linguistic, and tribal groups on the other. The three latter ones are included in the Constitution in order to preserve and in some cases also produce the culture. For example, Article 29 ensures groups and citizens having distinct language, script, and culture having the right to conserve them. The inclusion of caste communities, on the other hand, was only to ensure that the lower castes, especially Dalits, were not excluded from equal participation. So I want to place that on the table too, that in our constitution the term diversity is definitely not used as cultural diversity to mean that 3,990 caste groups form 3,990 cultural groups. They don't. In fact, we have had a good amount of documentation that the individual caste group's culture very definitely gets derived from casteism and the caste system. In other words, the culture that we generally assume that, let's say, a tribal group like the Nagas have is not the same as the assumption that any of those 3,990 groups have individual and independent cultures. The only possible, and this is my argument, the only possible candidate for this would be the large number of Dalit groups who have systematically developed some form of an anti-casteist cultural identity that they look outside of anything with caste, for example, Buddhism, to derive that identity, and Professor Jaffurlo has commented on it. If I have a couple more minutes, I'm going to wrap up. I'm done.
A couple.
All right, a couple more minutes. I'm just going to rush through a conversation I had with a potter artisan in central India in 1996. Potters in Chhattisgarh are OBCs, and in 2 districts in Madhya Pradesh, that's the next state, they are SCs. So here goes the conversation between anthropologists and potter. Anthropologists, why do you not exchange food and daughters with those other potters out there? Potter, because they are from another samaj or cultural community. But are they not also potters? Do they not also work the wheel? Yes, they are potters who use the wheel, but they use a stick to rotate the wheel. Unlike us, we use our bare hands. They are the Chaklautia potters, whereas we are the Jharia potters. These are two subcuts. So if they stop using the stick, will you have relations with them? Roti beti ka len den. No, we are from different firkas. Firkas are endogamous marriage circles. What about those other potters who come to your annual Samaj convention? No, they are from another region originally, whereas we are Chhattisgarhi, they are not. They are different. Are they potters? They don't even do potting. I hear that they do clothing and marble business. You're right, they are from Rajasthan and Gujarat. Anyway, why will they want to exchange food and daughters with us? We are poor. They don't like our rehen sehen. There's a class element going on. Such as, well, our women, for example, go out on the streets to sell pots. They do not like it. Their women stay at home. Okay, how about those other potters? Referring to a group of potters who live in the same town but in another neighborhood of Basti. Well, they are definitely not potters. They raise and eat pigs. We do not. But they call themselves potters or kumhars. They call themselves Chakradhari Kumhar. Yes, but only in name. As I said, they are not potters. They don't even know how to work the wheel. They make only bricks. Also, they are not from Chhattisgarh. But still, persistingly, I ask, are they not also potters? Maybe, but if we start marrying them, then what will be the difference between us? But why should there be difference between your groups? All are potters after all, isn't that so? Aha, yes, but they are lower than us, although they think that they are higher. In fact, we look at the Chakradharis as Harijans. This is a term that is very much in use in India as opposed to the legalese of Dalit or SC. We do not even take water from them. Anyway, when forced to reflect upon and defend his practice of social differentiation, Dularu Ram, who is a potter, readily admits that all these cultural distinctions eventually give way to pre-configured notions of hierarchy and inequality between castes, and cultural difference reveals the inequalities that it helps sustain. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Molly, for this good illustration of Ambedkar's graded inequality.
Let me first of all thank Gajendra and Janki to invite me here. It's really a commendable job they have done in organizing the conference in honor of Baba Saheb Ambedkar. And I'm sure 300 million of all Dalits all over the world will join me in appreciating this act. I'm not going to talk about reservation because the current neoliberal paradigm has rendered it meaningless. I'm not even talking about a democracy because we call India as the biggest and proudest democracy. My Dalit is something like 80% of Dalit who live in villages and who do not have any sort of access to anything practically, and that the hard reality of their life is currently the atrocities. And I am focusing basically that problem. I make basically following 5 propositions. 1, the classical caste system depicted by the 4 Varna structure is almost dead in India. 2, the existent caste system in India is concentrated at the lowest edge of the caste framework, marking the division of caste and non-caste people. 3, while in urban areas the caste system operates as a system of premium and discounts, its most insidious expression in the vast countryside is caste atrocities. 4, caste atrocities are the best proxy measure of the operational casteism and provide meaningful metrics to understand the contemporary form and its content. And 5, any attempt to present caste in a more complex manner amounts to obfuscate their essential feature, blur the vision of the annihilation, weaken the struggle against them, and only serve the interests of ruling classes. There's been huge scholarly interest in caste system, and there has been long history of anti-caste struggle. And the The discourse on caste still runs in a stereotypical manner, taking them as an amorphous continuum of hierarchies sourced from Hindu Dharma Shastras. There's a kind of romantic delight in amplifying the prowess of this vile institution, as defying the expectations of many, including the likes of Marx, that it would crumble under the onslaught of capitalism and forces of modernity. The problem with this kind of understanding of caste is that it is utterly useless in dealing with them, excepting perhaps for academic accomplishments and political opportunism. Firstly, such an amorphous continuum is not amenable to break into the neat contending camps with antagonistic contradictions, the resolution of which could be termed as resolution of caste issue. Secondly, since the continuum is supposed to exist with the religious authority of Hinduism, one is misled to infer that unless Hinduism is destroyed, caste may not be annihilated. Thirdly, the continuum with its inevitable fluidity in holding innumerable castes in hierarchy entails endless contention between them and imparts it a kind of self-regulative perpetuity. And fourthly, in dealing with them, it impels people toward directionless social engineering, rather than aiming at revolutionary change that this kind of deep-rooted venom requires. Castes are essentially hierarchy-seeking and hence pervasively divisive. They cut across classes, tend to germinate reactionary consciousness, and hence cannot be used for articulating any radical struggle. It is not to say that caste struggles that have taken place during the last century did not have radical content. They indeed were waged with radical vision and even accomplished a significant change in the lives of India's Shudras and Atishudras, the worst victims of caste. However, down the line, they entail rejuvenation of caste consciousness and enlivening of caste identities, totally antithetical development as far as their avowed objective of annihilation of caste was concerned. In my analysis, the main reason for this paradoxical result lay in their lack of grasp of the essence of caste to begin with and the failure to keep pace with their subsequent development. If we see through the brief history of encounters with caste, we get varied conceptions of caste depending upon the intent of the definer. Colonial rulers saw caste with their divisive potential and promoted their conceptualization in a manner in which India appears as a civil society as a bunch of communities warring among themselves. Non-Brahmin movement took caste as the contrivance of the outsider Aryan conquerors, the ancestors of the present Brahmins, for enslaving native people. Dalit movement, particularly under Dr. Ambedkar, came to the conclusion that castes were an integral part of the Hindu religious social structure and proposed the announcement of Hinduism to escape the caste bondage. For the communists, castes were just a feudal relic, a part of the superstructure which would automatically vanish when the economic base is changed through revolution. The contemporary Bahujanwadis look at caste as an asset to mobilize the oppressed masses into a constituency of 85% to vanquish the 15% upper caste. All of these conceptualizations reflect varied degrees of theoretical confusion and hence seem to lead to some kind of reformist program to bring about incremental improvement in the conditions of the lower caste. Contrary to commonplace notion, castes have been changing all through history. One can easily note the momentum changes in them during colonial period, brought about by the imperatives of colonial rule and during the spread of capitalist businesses and industries. Post-independence modernist project drove them further. For the paucity of time, I would not go into details how the changes have impacted the caste. What, however, would be noted is that notwithstanding the compromise capitalism struck with feudal forces, the caste relations with the emergent capitalist class were weakened to a large extent. The capitalist culture certainly had a debilitating impact on caste culture and traditions of these communities, leading to obliteration of ritual notion of hierarchy among them and promotion of social osmosis. The capitalist class, comprising entrepreneurs and managers belonging to Baniyas and Brahmins, and the business communities like Parsis, Khojas, and Bohras, largely overcome the classical caste hierarchy and came closer as a class. They would, however, preserve caste divide among lower castes to keep their feudal allies in supply chain pleased and to discipline the working class in their own establishment with its fatalistic ideology and divisive ethos. After independence, the bourgeois land law state that came into being in India adopted the modernist constitution. The state settled for modernization because the feudal classes also saw prospects for their advancement through it. The Nehruvian modernist project significantly comprised land reforms and green revolution, hugely enriched the farming Shudra caste, who replaced the upper caste landlords in villages. With this economic enrichment, coupled with their numerical strength achieved by consolidating all the middle class Shudra caste, they soon became an important element in the political picture in the post-independence period. In the context of caste, Green Revolution brought in capitalist relations in the countryside through development of cash economy and markets for agriculture inputs, outputs, and credit. On the positive side for Dalits, it broke the backbone of Balutedari system, but on the negative side, it abolished many of their traditional vocations. Without any alternative means of livelihood, the Dalits were increasingly pushed to work on the Shudra farms as landless laborers. With the displacement of traditional upper caste landlords, the baton of Brahminism was wielded by the newer Shudra castes and the sophistry of the former. They expected the Dalit to pay them obeisance as they did to the upper caste in yesteryears. However, the consciousness gained by Dalit through the Dalit movement conflicted with this expectation and contributed to build a grudge against them. The Shudra castes today dominate the political establishment and are fast coming up in entrepreneurship. Although the Vaishyas and Brahmins may be very visible as leading the capitalist establishment because of their first mover advantage, the Shudra castes are fast catching up. With their advancement in the economic and political scale, their ritual status as a classical inferior caste has almost vanished. They have not been virtual rulers of rural they have not been the virtual rulers of rural India, but have also captured the fast developing small towns. The very discourse of their backwardness, which has dominated the socio-political area for the last 2 decades, is rather the proof of their growing power. It is not that there are no poor or backwards among the Shudras. India, where 78% people subside on the earning of about 40 cents a day, suffer various deprivations and naturally fought only with the poor and backward people strewn across all castes and communities. Caste, however, is not secular poverty or backwardness. It is about the socio-cultural, quasi-racial prejudice against certain people. The most concentrated expression of existent caste is atrocities on Dalit. While Dalits were always wrong, the phenomena of atrocities could be marked in the increased powers asymmetry between Dalits and Shudras in villages. It almost begins with one of the first grave atrocities which took place on 25th December 1968 in Kilvanmani in Old Tanjore district of Tamil Nadu, in which 44 Dalits, mostly women and children, were massacred by the landlords and their henchmen. It was followed by a spate of atrocities all over the country. Initially, as even in Kilvanmani, the atrocities came as a consequence of class struggle waged by the communist parties, firstly by the parliamentary parties and later by Naxalites. After Kilvanmani, it was Purnia in Bihar, which saw the first caste massacre in 1969. Then there were a spate of killings all over Bihar over 3 decades. It only stopped when Dalits began to retaliate with the help of Naxalites. Atrocities mirror the intricacies of socio-dynamics vis-a-vis caste. As for instance, there has been qualitative difference between atrocities earlier and now. Earlier, atrocities were committed as a routine with the assumption of absolute right over Dalits, with no sense of wrongdoing. Now, atrocities are committed with a sense of loss of that right, with a sense of being wronged. Earlier, atrocities were committed in arrogance as Dalits would not speak out. Now they are committed in vengeance against Dalit assertion. Earlier, atrocities were the manifestation of contempt for Dalits. Today, they are a manifestation of resentment against the privileges Dalit get from the state. There has also been a difference between the nature of atrocities earlier and now. Earlier, they were committed as an integral part of the interaction between Dalits and non-Dalits, and hence tended to be casual, more of humiliating in nature than of physically damaging. Today, they are far more violent and are in nature of vengeance or punishment. They are therefore not only humiliating but also physically destructive, far more brutal than before. Earlier atrocities were mostly committed by individuals in a half of rage. Now they are committed collectively, somewhat in a planned manner, in a mode of demonstrative justice, teaching a lesson. The increasing number of atrocities against Dalits in recent years has been alarming enough, but the change in their intensity also is noteworthy. Notwithstanding these differences, what lay at the root of atrocities in any time is the asymmetry of power. The fact of perpetrators being more powerful than the victims. The precipitation of this asymmetry occurs either in a routine form, when this asymmetry is legitimated by some way as in earlier times, or in the event of crisis as it does now. Despite the seeming progress of Dalits, this asymmetry of power has remained more or less intact. As the development paradigm during the post-independence period helped Dalits make some progress, it has helped the caste forces in far greater measure. This asymmetry expresses itself through the familiar fault lines of caste into atrocities wherever the caste forces experience crisis. Atrocities, data on which incidentally are maintained by the government, can serve the best proxy measure for existent casteism. The intensity of atrocities, the area in which they take place, their frequency, their time series growth, and even the data on subsequent process of justice delivery system in respect of them provide good metrics to understand caste and caste dynamics and for strategizing combat against them. Many a myth get exploded in their wake. For instance, the myth of upper caste oppressors, the myth of development dampening the caste, the myth of representation logic dearly upheld by Dalits, the myth of victims being the weakest, the myth of vibrant anti-caste Dalit movement, the myth of existence of progressivism in India, and in the greatest myth of state being the friend of Dalit, or at least impartial mediator between Dalits and others, had all crumbled at Khairlanji. It held out mirror before us and showed us what needs to be done. All atrocities unambiguously exposed that casteism is no more confined to civil society. It is well supported by the state apparatus, implying thereby that the anti-caste forces necessarily have to deal with the state. Contrary to commonplace view, the problem of caste has become much simpler today than ever before. The existential caste are confined to a divide between Dalits and non-Dalits, quite like the racial divide between blacks and whites, or class division between capitalists and proletariat. No time in history, castes rendered themselves as easy for combating against as they do now. The historical project of annihilation of caste is most feasible to accomplish than any time before. Atrocities as the concentrated expression of existing caste need to be singularly targeted for annihilation of caste. Babasaheb Ambedkar, while explaining the rationale behind his declaration of religious conversion to his vanguard followers in 1936, had basically developed his logic with the very problem of atrocities. He diagnosed that caste Hindus dared to perpetrate atrocities on Dalits because Dalits were too weak to retaliate. He therefore proposed a solution in terms of supplementing their strength by merging with some existing religious community through mass religious conversion. 70 years ago, in the communally charged atmosphere, he could speak of communitarian supplement to the Dalit strength. As it happened, he even did not do so. In today's situation, when classes are sprouting out of bellies of caste, can we imagine of a class supplement as exemplified by Gaya Jahanabad in Bihar or Shundur in Andhra Pradesh, not only at the solution of atrocities and in turn of caste, but for doing away most of oppression and exploitation from the Indian soil? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anand. I'm sure we'll go back to Kalanji during the Q&A session. Shiva, this is now your turn, and your presentation will deal with effective transfer policy options for the Dalits.
It's a real honor to stand before you and share some of my views on the subject. While congratulating the organizers, I remain grateful for bringing me here. I have chosen a topic under the broad title Caste and Contemporary India, Effective Transfer Policy Options for the Dalits. I have chosen this topic not because I was associated with government for a number of years and I had an opportunity to look at the policy makers at close quarters, but because government still remains the largest source of finance for the Dalits and the issues need to be discussed. India is a typical example where the mainstream policy makers consider that the programs for the poor are at best a short-term strategy or appeasement or palliative, and at worst, a worthless expenditure. The strategy in mainstream development policy so far has been one of distributing subsidies in exchange of poor's right to vote. It's not just a distribution, it is exchange for poor's right to vote. The analogy behind the ruler's conventional political behavior could be for the following reasons. The policymakers' traditional apathy towards Dalits, as they constitute a sizable number among the poor, illiteracy and lack of political awareness among the Dalits, poverty alleviation and not equity that guides the policymakers. The Dalits in general are landless agricultural laborers, and any effective transfer such as land could upset the prevailing power structure in the village polity. The memorandum entitled States and Minorities by Ambedkar and submitted to the Constituent Assembly on behalf of the All India Scheduled Caste Federation included, among other things, protection of scheduled caste against communal excesses, protection against social and official tyranny. Why I'm saying this? Because he's going to suggest something more to protect scheduled caste. That is, agriculture as a state industry with the backbone of the principle of no landlord, no tenant, and no landless laborers. As a permanent solution to untouchability, a separate settlement must be created, and which I'm going to interpret it as a separate panchayat for Dalits, and settlement commission to be constituted to hold uncultivated land belonging to the state in a trust for settlement of the scheduled caste in separate villages, and an annual fund of rupees 5 crores for the purpose of promoting the settlement. This may be 5,000 crores now, but maybe more, 50,000 crores also those days. The policymakers, after all, a breed of the Indian caste society of vertical gradations, conceived by irrationality and governed with the intention of perpetuating the dominant ascendance of the dominant caste, preferred not to follow Ambedkar. In the wake of India's recent economic growth, it is imperative to examine the transfer policies of the government of India relating to the Dalits and the poor, and to take up questions relating to long-term effective redistributive measures. Therefore, the paper would focus on the mainstream policy reforms in the wake of India's recent growth and effective transfer policy options. The last 15 years witnessed a steady growth in the Indian economy. The GDP at factor cost has been growing at an enormous rate of 8.1%. When compared to 30 years span of 1950 and 81, it was just 3 to 4%. And even in 2004 and 5, it was 6%. Now, 2005 and 6 has witnessed 8.1%. The exports have nearly doubled from 2002 to 2003, US dollars 52.7 billion to US dollars 102.7 billion in 2005 and 2006. The total foreign investment inflow has risen. Also, I don't want to give the figures because I will circulate the papers later on. The automobile sector offers yet another dramatic expansion. The sales of passengers vehicles have risen from 707,000 to 1.4 million. In 2006, the total number of telephone lines stood at 158 million, but it was just 5 million during 1990-91. Out of this 158 million connections, 117.2 are cellular. The above are some of the growth indicators that India can really boast about. There's no doubt. But these developments could have helped India to emerge as an egalitarian society had an aggregate trade-off between the twin goals of economic growth and reduction in inequality been contemplated at the design level. Also, this development could have transformed India from a basically agriculture feudal economy into a modern one. But it has miserably failed. The reason being that the recent growth was rather induced by the changing global trends of technological innovations than by the foresighted development policies of the Government of India. But I totally don't deny that these global trends have been exploited by Government of India for its own favor. Now, as a result, nearly 26% of Indian population is living below poverty line. Rural India remains unchanged, with much of its population living in the rural area. Nearly 77% live in the rural area. And the farm workers are 58%. The share of agriculture in the GDP has fallen from 46% in 1970-71 to 21% 2004 and 5. Now, the Dalits are the worst hit. The incidence of poverty among them is 35 to 40%. The January 13, 2002 Bhopal Declaration highlighted there was not a single Dalit billionaire, businessman, or industrialist in a country that produced world's richest businessmen. Even the hope of getting opportunities in public firms has become irrelevant in the wake of privatization. I can give you some more indicators. You just take the number of illiterates, or the number of unemployed youth, the number of bonded laborers, the number of child laborers, and maternal mortality, infant mortality, everything is high in Dalit community. So another important factor featured by the recent economic growth is the slow growth in the manufacturing sector. Keeping in view the highly capital and skilled labor intensive nature of this sector, in spite of its contribution towards GDP, it cannot absorb the excess farm labor immediately and effectively. So therefore, what is the alternative? Given the above situation, the economic reformers for future India are left with only three options. One is immediate and drastic reforms in agriculture sector, aiming distribution of assets and resources to the rural landless, strengthening of rural industry or rural services which are in the informal sector, and steady investment in employment generating skill development. But currently, what do the economic reformers think in India? They see reforms as subsidy elimination in financial terms and in administrative parlances of good governance through sheer force of commitment and power exercised by honest officials. I can swear that neither of the best of civil servants nor the efficient of private companies can bring back good governance against distorted government policies. The Government of India's programs targeting the Dalits and the poor can be broadly grouped into 4 items, because I want to give a picture what are the schemes are implemented in broad categories. Number 1, the mainstream. Second, the community. Third, the individual. And the last, the area-based programs. Under the mainstream programs, funds are allocated sector-wise, namely agriculture, industry, power, irrigation, etc. The benefits are expected to flow to the members of the mainstream and to trickle down to the poor too. The community-based programs cover different disadvantaged communities, including the Dalits, through the reservation policy. Also, the Dalits and tribals are covered by the special component plan and the tribal sub-plan respectively. The third categories of individual and family-oriented programs are basically food subsidies through public distribution system and credit insurance facilities under identified projects. The area-based programs cover geographically disadvantaged people living in the hill and drought-prone areas. Now look, myriads of programs, variety of programs, considering the multiplicity of programs orchestrated by sound socio-economic theories, worldwide economists will conclude that the existence of persistent poverty in India could be only for 2 reasons. One is lack of resources, next is lack of good governance. But alas, they would hardly detect the evil design of caste in all such reform negotiations. For example, what could be simply passed over as rural credit system by the economist could be a system of bonded labor in practice, an outcome of the caste system, because the lower castes are forced to work as free labor in the landlord's house. Similarly, out-migration of labor would simply mean hazardous urban slums where the main occupants are Dalits. The belated wisdom of Government of India that the Dalits could hardly benefit from the mainstream 5-year plans resulted in the announcement of a separate plan for Dalits. We will apportion resources equal to the population of the Dalits. That was the announcement by the government. But what was in practice? We will see what is in practice. The plan of the Government of India is merely to guide the state governments from your own pockets, please allocate money. I will not see what is going on there. The funds allocated, but it is not without its own traps and tricks. The funds allocated would be spent on 2 types of projects. One is divisible, one is non-divisible. What is non-divisible, what is divisible, the Dalits hardly have any say in the matter. Non-divisible projects meant regular sectoral projects. Again, square one. It's agriculture, industry, irrigation. That is the normal mainstream programs. And divisible programs are directly that reach the Dalits, which is normally a meager fund allocated for the purpose. Now, after much shouting by me and Mr. Krisdas Gandhi in the IAS, now they have at least been careful to show what is divisible and what is non-divisible, and they make it equal, but nothing reach the poor. I'm coming to the point. The divisible projects target the specific needs of the Dalits, and only meager funds are made available. The ambiguity between divisible and non-divisible has provided ample scope for the tricks to be played. For example, while the Dalit cultivator, it's not a joke, please, but anyway, it looks like a joke. For example, while the Dalit cultivators constitute only 11% of the total Dalit population, who normally own arid and semi-arid barren lands. They are expected to utilize 19% share under agriculture sector, which offers schemes mainly to irrigated lands. And the government of Tamil Nadu rightfully claims that 19% funds are utilized for the Dalits in that sector. This may be the case of Tamil Nadu, but I can vouch in all the states in India, it must be the same. Similar is the case in the power sector. 1/5 of Tamil Nadu's annual budget is allocated to this sector. Power is considered non-divisible. I think it sounds ironical. You cannot share power with people. The Dalits as landless laborers are consumers of 19% power as per government book of accounts. Yet another example is the transport sector, where the Dalits are neither the commercial transport operators, nor are they contractors laying roads. As sheer paid passengers, they are utilizing 19% funds of the government. What is relevant here is that unless Dalits are landowners, they would be kept away from all economic activities. You cannot reach the government. You cannot reach anywhere, any corridor of power, because you cannot get irrigation. You cannot utilize the water. You cannot utilize the power. You cannot borrow loan. 70,000 crores of rupees have been written off by the government. The loans that was the loan taken by the agriculturists. But the poor Dalits had taken some petty loans. The government was not willing to write it off. And there was nobody to ask that demand for the same in the government of India. What is relevant here, unless the Dalits are landowners, they would be kept away from all economic activities of the country. And even when the special components plan is said to be in force, they would not benefit out of it. Unless the divide between the divisible and the non-divisible is scrapped, a separate planning body is created under the constitution to look into the specific needs of the Dalits. Because nobody wants to listen to the needs of the Dalits. What do I need? There are a number of theories they want to propound and propagate and then force them on us. But nobody would like to listen to us. What do we exactly need? Another major transfer policy targeting the Dalits and the poor is the distribution of the essential commodities like rice, wheat, sugar, etc. through the PDS. PDS is the Public Distribution Network. What had been initiated as a famine relief program, they quietly soft-landed as a famine relief program in the affected areas. Now it has come to occupy the main scene, and it is the only program that is for the poor. It is a permanent program. An annual expenditure of 26,200 crores is spent, and it features 66.5% as administrative cost, such as procurement from farmers, hulling, milling, storage, transportation, fumigation, establishment, etc., etc. and only 31.2% of the money is actually spent on subsidizing the food grain. Much of this is also lost in leakage and theft on the way, and barely 13 paise per rupee spent on food subsidy actually reach the poor. But what reaches the poor, whether they are able to, whether it is palatable, that is a real question mark. The fact that barely a third of fiscal subsidy and a fair share of special component plan, if delivered in the form of cultivable land, preferably to Dalit women, because I want to quote, I am not able to be in the gender panel, so I want to make sure that the Dalit women get some lands, and accompanied by the package of direct subsidies by buying electricity, water and other agriculture inputs, at one stroke all the perverse incentives that are at the root of the management failure can be removed. What are the management failure? Corruption, underutilization of special component plan funds, diversion of PDS stock to open market, underwayment to cardholders, adulteration, etc. So many that has been infesting the public distribution system. Needless to mention that Dalits and the poor are empowered through such effective transfers. To the Dalits as a community, which has been long displaced and prevented from ownership of land due to perverse caste laws. I have to mention what is the caste law. The caste law says that the Brahmin cannot touch the plough, but he has to own the land. And the Dalits, he cannot own the land, but he has to toil. So this is the caste law. There is no rationality. Therefore, land is not merely a source of livelihood, but also central to the lost identity and culture. Realizing this and keeping in view the number of atrocities committed on the landless and the illiterate among the Dalits, because people are talking about atrocities, and every day you witness something. But if you carefully study, each atrocity is somehow or other related to landlessness or illiteracy, and we are not targeting them directly. Realizing this and keeping in view the number of atrocities committed on the landless and illiterate among the Dalits, Ambedkar said to Dalits. He didn't say to others. He said to Dalits, education is our future, no doubt, whereas land is our present as well as future. If only you have land, you can educate your children. I can say that 70% of the IAS officers, the top bureaucrats, they must have had some landed property, otherwise they would not have reached. I challenge this factor. Maybe people here, the scholars who present here also, I can safely say that they must be owning some land. Otherwise, they cannot reach this place. There are some arguments, and look at the other side. What do they think about these programs? Because I was not given an official forum like this. That's why I'm really indebted to Janki and others. Because in India, you cannot address people like this, especially the Dalits and the others together. I can secretly talk to Dalits under a tree, and I will not be given a public forum. And if I'm given a public forum, I am supposed to conduct myself very well. So therefore, I abstain sometime, and so this is the official forum. So I consider, I proudly admit and I say, there are some arguments from my friends and colleagues who are in the IS. One argument is that while agriculture is being least profitable for the existing landowners, as they are already overburdened with debts, a number of suicides you hear in Maharashtra and areas. And then why do you want to burden the Dalits? They are so concerned. Another suggested, due to the growing demand of power, see, look at, even now we have power cuts in spite of the government spending 1/5 of its budget. And if you want to cut short and give it to the Dalits, where will we go for power? But you will be adequately compensated elsewhere, where they will not say it. But all of them are of the opinion that any attempt to meddle with land policy will lead to large-scale violence, because as such, Kairlanji or wherever the problem, there has been bloodshed and violence. And if government introduces a policy, there will be a large-scale violence and bloodshed. What was common among them was the quick consensus was, yes, the PDS has to be scrapped, no subsidy. But what about land reforms? It is independent of land reforms. So you scrap PDS, but I'm not going to voice my opinion about land reforms. Even among the Dalit scholars, one finds the subject of effective transfers, such as land, has not become a major preoccupation. So that I don't want to comment, but the Dalit scholars are here. They can as well explain why they are making a big statement about such effective land transfer. In reply to the comments, it may be stated that large holdings through mechanized cultivation and supported by credit market links no doubt yield high output, and government interventions are required only at the time of natural calamities and credit market. This is a theory. When there is a failure, when there is a natural calamity, government need to interfere, but otherwise you give them land, large holding, mechanized cultivation, agriculture is fine. And maybe subsidies sometimes. This may be true of land-rich countries like America and maybe the developed countries. But in India, the land dynamics is quite different, as I told you already. You know, the land tax they are charging now, you'll be surprised, just 4 rupees per acre. Whereas the Dalit landless agriculture laborer, he pays 2 rupees for a small hammam soap, body soap. So the landowners are much subsidized, and he is not given land, he is not given electricity, he is not given anything at all, house, nothing, but he pays tax. But people are under the impression that Dalits don't pay tax, always live on the government. It is not so. We pay the highest tax in proportion, if you really take proportion to our income. Therefore, this may be true of land-rich and developed countries, but in India, the land dynamics is quite different. The asset-based inequalities nurtured by caste structure have led a population of nearly 260 million to abject poverty, resulting in enormous social costs. People talk about equity and efficiency trade-off in agriculture. But won't they take into account this wasteful, poverty-perpetuating 260 million, and the costs involved in it? They don't take into account. What kind of equity and efficiency trade-off? I don't understand. If economists are here, they are supposed to explain to me why they are not taking into account this social costs. Assuming that initial inequality in terms of assets, because we always speak about initial inequality. We are all equal now, but you have property, I don't, not anything. So this leads to further weakness and indebtedness. So if you assume that initial inequality in terms of assets as a source of livelihood, not any other asset, I may be having gold, but as a source of livelihood, has a linear effect on future incomes. Effective land transfer is the only option. I talked about 3 options, now I come to only one option. That is, the land transfer is the only option left before the government. It is not left before the Dalits, it is left before the government because it has to change. Agriculture has to be modernized, it has to grow. Agriculture contribution to GDP has to increase. So it is the only option left before the government. At the recipient level too, unless one can initially assure that hard work will yield good result, required result, there can be no productivity of any sort. This is, I think, proved theory. Distribution of land and accompanied direct subsidy. Because there was an argument in front of the Chief Minister when I was Secretary Adra on Tribal Welfare. She said, oh, you want to give land to the Dalits. As such, they are, even multinationals are finding it difficult to, develop this land and make agriculture profitable, and you want to give it to the poor Dalits. Now, I was so reminded the opinions never change. The Britishers, when they suggested land should be given to the Dalits, the erstwhile Board of Revenue, of course, dominated by the higher caste, they said the Dalits don't have clothes to wear, and how can they cultivate? So, the opinions 100 years before still persist with the government. However, distribution of land and accompanied by direct subsidy package, so it has to be accompanied by direct subsidy in like electricity, water, etc. I'm coming to the last paragraph. However, the process of change at the policy level is not easy. Ambedkar firmly believed that the destiny of the disadvantaged poor will not change as long as they are not made partners of power. His prime argument was that the victims of Brahminical social order needed a strong power to destroy the power on the other side, because it was power that ultimately made one interest dominant over the other. True to his sayings, the early Indian political situation featured a high proportion of rural landowners and members of dominant castes in formal politics. And it was their presence in the Congress party that stood against all land reforms. The present era of mass politics has proved no better, as there are political squabbles over allocation of public finances between different political constituencies. Now, if you take agriculture, there are separate political constituency. They are mostly backward class landowners and higher, caste landowners. They are a different political constituency. The poor are the most backward class, and the Dalits, they are the different political constituency. They want finances. So the argument here would be, because while the cultivators as a power block claim higher procurement prices from government, you pay more price for my product. But the poor will claim, give me less price for my food. So government is torn between these two political constituencies. So the argument here would be that homogeneous interests are created by increasing the number of cultivators every year through transfers for a favorable agriculture policy. You add the number every year to the cultivator so that the favorable agriculture policy is shaped. The retention of PDS, what will happen to the PDS? A massive structure created, 26,200 crores. It will still remain only for those who cannot help themselves. Dalits can help themselves. Please, we must really ascertain that Dalits can help themselves. They are not the people who cannot help themselves. The political economy of India has demonstrated that growth leading to high inequality and short-term measure to lower poverty can coexist. There's no problem. So you go in one track, I go in one track. I go with a begging bowl and you live in luxury. This is the common scene that you can witness in government. The fact that inequality is high need not necessarily mean that there will be conscious decision to lower it, especially when the victims are Dalits. Maybe if somebody else, the government will rush to solve it. If it is the Dalit, it is the past experience. Therefore, what do we do? How others can help? How people here can help us? The Dalits have to form national and international coalitions that can influence and force discussions first, because the subject is not being discussed at all. So force discussions on effective land transfers and decisions by the government, non-governmental organization, and monitor the outcome. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Shiva, for reminding us of the deficiencies of the state in India and this pressing issue that is land reform.